Can you hear me now? Anyways, thanks for listening, and if there's any questions, you can see me afterwards. Did you guys get all that? Um, okay, I'm just going to get right into my spiel because I have a lot to cover tonight. Oh, come on. Well, consider Proverbs 6:6. It says, "Go to the ant, you lazy one, observe its ways and be wise." And so, what we're going to look at tonight is Solomon introduces a new character type, um, what he refers to as the sluggard. And he does this to show the importance of being diligent and industrious. So, a lot of times, Solomon will show the negative part, and then we're supposed to apply the attribute of the positive part. So, we'll look at the sluggard, and this is not to be confused with the wise, the fool, and the simple. Um, but consider the ant. There's more ants than any other insect in the world. And some of you get plagued with them in this, well, after the rains, they want to come out. They typically are busy in the warmer months. Oh, no. That's nowhere where, oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. They're busy in the warmer months and they hibernate in the winter. And then, like the ant I have up there in the corner, they carry a load twice as big as that, many times as big as that. And I'm sure all of us probably go back to kids. Hopefully, you guys weren't out playing in the dirt, messing around with ants in the last couple of days. But when we were kids, we can always remember seeing an ant and seeing it carrying like a big old, let's say rock, but I mean, it's twice as big as the ant. And that ant's just carrying it along. They're constantly on the go and they're constantly busy. And then the other picture I have up there, anyone with kids could probably relate to it, but it's the Disney movie, The Bug's Life. And it's a movie that's always on at our house. In fact, it was on today. And it's based on Aesop's fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper. And basically, the premise of Aesop's the ant and the grasshopper, and to that degree, Bug's Life, but probably much more entertaining, I suppose. The grasshoppers, they just party and goof around, and in this movie, the Bug's Life, they're simulated, they're buzzing around like they're on Harleys, and they're going to all these, cartoon grasshopper bars, and just not doing anything they're supposed to, no preparedness or anything. And then when wintertime comes and they need food, they go steal it from the ants. And ants work hard to supply them with the food. And finally, the ants get fed up with it, and the grasshoppers come and say, "Well, where's our food?" And they're like, "Nope, we're not doing it anymore." And goes right along with what Solomon is saying about the ant. And then kind of makes me think of the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew chapter 5, where you had the 5 foolish virgins and the 5 wise virgins. And the foolish virgins didn't bring any oil, and the wise ones, they ended up asking the wise ones, and they're like, "We're not going to have enough to give to you. You weren't industrious enough or prepared enough, so you need to go get some." And so we know how the story goes there, where the foolish virgins go and get the oil, and they come back, and they miss the bridegroom. And they go knock on the door, and they beg to come in and say, "Lord, Lord, open the door to us." But he answers them, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you." And so, in the practical, literal sense of how Solomon presents this idea of the sluggard and the anti of the sluggard, the industrious, we have to be industrious, especially concerning our salvation and our spiritual life. And that's kind of where we'll go with the first part of this. And I apologize, I did not have the questions here Sunday. I did so good all along of having those back there, at least the Sunday before. I had them on my entryway to walk out and grab Sunday morning. Nope, forgot them. I'll get them Sunday night. Looked out, forgot them. But they're back there now. So question number one, and I'm going to kind of go through this real fast because this is probably the least of my points, and I have a lot of points to make, but it is pertinent. It says, how does Solomon describe the sluggard or the lazy? And the more appropriate stuff that we want to apply from this is the opposite of what the sluggard is. It doesn't really do us I mean, the idea of what a sluggard is we need to focus more on what a sluggard is so that we are not that. But let's look at the first one I have under A there. 26:14, as the door turns on its hinge, so does a lazy one on his bed. 6:9 through 10, how long will you lie down, you lazy one? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of his hands to rest. And then 20:13, do not love sleep, or you will become poor. Open your eyes, and you will be satisfied with food. So we see this idea of sleep, and the lazy person likes to sleep, the sluggard person likes to sleep. And cherishing sleep as an escape from a reality and responsibility. I like going to bed at night, and I always kind of cherish that moment when I can go upstairs and say, the day's over, I get to lay down on my bed, watch 30 minutes of mindless television, and fall asleep. I enjoy that. But I'm also not laying in bed all day till 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock. And keep in mind, Solomon was directing this somewhat to his young boys, his sons. And think of a 13-year-old boy during summer vacation. What time does he get up? What time is it? 1 o'clock? Oh, yeah, it's 1 o'clock. Get up. Okay. So if you kind of think along those lines. The rest also benefits the hard worker, but it hinders the lazy. And keep that idea of sleep in your mind, because we're going to come back to it. I'll make a point about it later. 21:25 through 26. The desire of the lazy one puts him to death, for his hands refuse to work. All day long he is craving, while the righteousness gives and does not hold back. And then 24:30 through 34, I passed by the field of a lazy one, and by the vineyard of a person lacking sense. And behold, it was completely overgrown with weeds. Its surface was covered with weeds, and its stone wall was broken down. When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Then your poverty will come like a drifter, and your need like an armed man. So Solomon's saying also this sluggard person, this lazy person, has the inability to start. Lack of motivation, procrastination. I'll get on that tomorrow. Tomorrow comes around. Oh, you know what? I've got this going on. I'll get on that later. So it's very hard to get started on something, always putting things off. And that's how the sluggard is, the lazy person. 19:24 and 12:27 says, the lazy one buries his hand in the dish, but will not even bring it back to his mouth. A lazy person does not roast his prey, but the precious possession of a person is diligence. So that's almost kind of comical. The lazy person is so lazy that he's eating his food, and he's like, oh, it's not even worth the effort of putting my spoon up to my mouth. They have the inability to stick with a task until it's to its conclusion. They might make a promising start, but they don't have the conviction or the motivation or the endurance to take a task to conclusion. And sometimes you may see them be somewhat successful. They work hard to achieve something, and then they just completely let it go to waste. And then 20 verse 4 and 22:13, the lazy one does not plow after the autumn, so he digs during the harvest and has nothing. And then 22:13, the lazy one says, there is a lion outside. I will be killed in the streets. And so, why would one not plow after autumn? You're rolling into wintertime, right? You roll into wintertime, and what? It's cold outside. I'm not plowing outside when it's cold. So there's excuses. And then the lion outside in the city streets. I think Ian referred to this one and the humor of it in one of his lessons. And I don't know, maybe back in ancient times of the Israelites, I kind of read that it could be supposed that there could feasibly maybe be a lion in the vicinity. Don't use that one trying to get out of work and calling in sick here in Bakersfield. There's a lion. Probably not going to work. But the idea is that they're full of excuses. It's too cold. It's too dangerous. And then one more point on kind of the characteristics of the sluggard or the lazy. 13:4 says, the soul of the lazy one craves and gets nothing. but the soul of the diligent is made prosperous. And then 14:23, in all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And so the sluggard has a lot of dreams and desires, a lot of things in his head that he wants to complete and accomplish, but just lacks the diligence, lacks the ambition to do it. They're just not industrious. So any questions or comments on some of those qualities of the sluggard, the lazy? So question number 2 on the sheet says, read Proverbs 10:4-5, and then compare or describe the benefits of the industrious person versus the lazy person. And I kind of listed them all here at once. Proverbs 10:4-5, it says, poor is one who works with a lazy hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. Then 10:16, the wages of the righteous is life, the income of the wicked punishment. In 13:11, wealth obtained from nothing dwindles, but one who gathers labor increases it. And then 18:9, he also who is lax in his works is brother to him who destroys. So we can see here in these scriptures here that Solomon has in Proverbs that you can definitely tell the industrious person is going to be more associated with wealth. The lazy person or the sluggard is going to be more associated with poverty. And it says that the industrious person is wise, whereas the sluggard or the lazy person is more associated with shame. We could see the call of life and punishment in 10:16. The wages of righteousness is life, the income of the wicked is punishment. And we can see that the benefits of wealth here on this earth would lead towards a more abundant life, and we'll talk more about that. And then another point he brings up is that wealth received through diligent hard work is going to increase. But any gain received by the sluggard or the lazy person through some kind of quick scheme or some kind of get-rich scheme or some kind of scandalous thing or dishonest idea isn't going to last. It's going to dwindle. It will not suffice. And then probably the most important one to make out of there, and I'll expand on, is in verse 18:9, where it says, he is brother to him who destroys. And I think we can take that on to a little bit further meaning. So it's clear that diligence and hard work are characteristics of wisdom. And again, Solomon shows the benefits of diligence and hard work and warns against laziness in a very literal sense. And I don't know why, but I was thinking back to a class, this was probably 2 or 3 years ago, when Mitch and Dave taught a class on Christians in the workplace. I mean, you can see the idea of Christians in the workplace, how are we to portray ourselves, and then you see those characteristics of the industrious person versus the lazy person. And we know we need to be, as workers, we would be diligent, ethical, honest, and just hard-working examples. So I think there's a deeper metaphorical meaning in 18:9, where it says, he who also is lax in his work is a brother to him that destroys. So the problem with the sluggard, and we're going to talk more about, because the sluggard is going to get associated with poverty and being poor, and then you'll see where Solomon really slams the poor and the poverty-stricken people. But I think when he's doing that, he's referring to it as a result of them getting to that state by being a sluggard. And so the sluggard doesn't look upon their life as servitude to the Lord. He doesn't look upon his life as something that he's supposed to give an account for, like we find in Romans 14:12. But the sluggard takes life and just looks at it as a gift that's been given to him, that he's at liberty to do with it and spend it as it is any way he may please. Janine?
This is all around us. This is being taught by our government. Will provide for you. And we've got a whole generation of people that will go down to 1 Timothy 5:8. But there's a whole generation of people that just don't care. I'll be taken care of. And it's right here for us.
It's a scary point Janine makes, but it's true. And the idea of work ethic in our children it's kind of minimal. We try to strive, and there's a lot of kids that just have no ethic towards work, and that entitled generation, it's very much affecting us now. We see it all around us, like Janina said. So Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them." God created us to do good works. God expects us to bear fruit, and we kind of show this, we show our faith through our works. Romans 12:11 goes on to expand that idea of producing fruit and spiritual industriousness. And it says, not lagging behind in diligent, fervent in spirit, and serving the Lord. So when it comes to the idea of being the sluggard versus being the opposite, being someone that is industrious, responsible, diligent in their work ethic, God wants us to be self-motivated. He wants us to be disciplined, and most of all, He wants us to use that industriousness towards serving the Lord. And so I'm sure we can all relate to the sluggard when it comes times to do those tasks that we really don't want to do. There's other things I'd rather do. I wanted to go on a bike ride the other day, but I needed to go prune the lemon tree. But I know it's more important to go prune the lemon tree, so I went and pruned the lemon tree. And I don't mind pruning a lemon tree, to be honest with you. It's kind of somewhat enjoyable until it gets stuck with all kinds of thorns and stuff. But so there's an obvious level of literal application there in that Solomon is clearly articulating and getting across to the young people that this is prominently going out to. But it's an even more urgent application that we find in our spiritual lives, in our spiritual duties, and our spiritual obligations. And Paul uses a figure of speech similar to what we just read about that first characteristic of the sluggard, that he likes to sleep, and he always finds himself asleep. And this always amazes me when you can come back to these New Testament references back to, here Paul, you can't tell me Paul's not referring back to what Solomon taught when we look at these two verses. Romans 13:11 says, "Do this knowing the time that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. For now salvation is nearer to us than we first believed." And then also in 1 Thessalonians 5:4-6, "But you, brothers and sisters, are not in darkness, so that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let's not sleep as others do, but let's be alert and sober." And so you see this more, Paul's now applying this idea of being asleep to our spirituality and saying, don't be a spiritual sluggard. Any questions or comments on that? So let's move on to the next idea of this, talking about poverty and wealth. And a couple key points that I want to begin with, because some of this, when Solomon's talking about the poor and poverty, seems kind of harsh. But one thing that Solomon does is Solomon has a way about him in the Proverbs of simply stating the facts. And just like Janine said, it's kind of a messed up world, and this is kind of what's going on. And Solomon gets that also. He's saying it's a fact of life. There's rich people in the world and there's poor people in the world. But Solomon also comes back and clarifies that and shows what's right about that. Are poor people terrible? Some of this stuff you'll see in here, you think, wow, okay. But he's referring to those that are poor because of their sluggardness. But he also makes it very clear, and we'll get a couple points on this to show that, but like 22:2, Proverbs 22:2. The rich and the poor have a common bond. The Lord is the maker of them all. So Solomon is telling us, hey, there's rich people, there's poor people in this world. And what do we do as people? Do we not have a tendency to kind of judge them? But Solomon makes it very clear, hey, the Lord is the maker of them all, and he is not impartial as many times as we are. And I'm guilty of it. Today, I took Abby to school, coming out of my neighborhood. Everything seemed all right. And right there on the side of the neighborhood street where you come out on Olive is where the Parker goes to the bus. And no one was there. It was all clear. So that always makes me think, okay, good, Parker caught the bus. We're okay there. And then coming back home from bringing Abby to school, I go there and there's this guy right there where I know Parker and his friends and the boys and girls from the neighborhood gather to get the bus. There's a homeless guy, smoking a cigarette, got something in a bottle here, and his bag, his cart full of stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, and I'm already kind of thinking, I'm thinking in my head, well, what if that guy was there when that first kid, there's always that solo kid that's the first kid at the bus stop, and he has to go deal with this guy. And that's just a humanistic thing to me, and it's worse because I worked in a prison, and that's something I struggle with. But who knows? That guy may have been there passing out Bibles. I don't know. I kind of doubt it, but who am I to judge? That's probably a thing. Let me finish that with who am I to judge? But it's a sad human characteristic that Solomon says, hey, that's what it is, but God doesn't look at it that way. God doesn't care. He's not impartial. So that's one point I want to make as we get into this poverty and wealth idea. And he also makes it very clear that it's ultimately righteousness, not wealth, that is going to deliver us from death. And he does that. We see that in 11:4. It says, riches do not benefit on the day of wrath, but righteousness rescues from death. And then 11:28, one who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf. So if you were just to not be super familiar with the Bible and how to study it, it'd be real easy for someone, maybe perhaps a non-Christian or a naysayer type of person or a foolish person, to pick up God's word and go to Proverbs and say, hey, Solomon needs you got to work, you got to try to get money. Wealth, it's all about wealth. But if you continue to study that and look a couple, verses along down the lines, like, no, he's not really saying that. He's saying that, yes, it's a benefit here while we're on earth, but there's things, it does not benefit us on the day of wrath, and then it will all fail. One who trusts in his riches and wealth, it'll all fail. It's all kind of meaningful. Or meaningless, sorry. It's all kind of meaningless. Wealth is kind of meaningless. It's an aid while we're here on earth. Other than that, it doesn't do anything for us. And then you can definitely see the relationship of wisdom to wealth. So one of the ways you can discern a wise person, they can be identified by the way they handle money. And it's not necessarily discerned by the amount of money they have, but it's how they gained the money, because Solomon makes it very clear you need to gain it in honest terms and not dishonesty, and how they use their money and what one's attitude towards money is. So I have question number 3. What are some of the advantages of wealth? And Proverbs 10:15. The rich person's wealth is his fortress. The ruin of the poor is their poverty. So here, you see Solomon come off and say, oh, well, a rich person's wealth is his fortress, okay? He's got a lot tied up in there. It's my fortress. My wealth is my fortress. We kind of think of our homes as our fortress. I feel pretty safe in my home, definitely comfortable in my home. It's a safe place to me. Um, is it my fortress? Sure, I suppose. Um, but then look at what Solomon comes up, 4, 5, 6 chapters later, 8 chapters later, 18:11. A rich person's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own imagination. Okay, in his own imagination. So it's a false temporary sense of security. So Solomon says, yeah, wealth is great here on earth, but don't get too caught up in it. Don't put it's a false sense of security that wealth gives you. Wealth may make you feel safe and comfortable, but it's truly a false sense of security. 14:20, and this is where it gets a little bit harsh regarding the poor. That's why I talk about how referencing they became poor because of their sluggard type attitude. But it says, the poor is hated even by his neighbor, but those who love the rich are many. The 19:4, wealth adds many friends, but a poor person is separated from his friend. And then 19:6-7, many will seek the favor of a generous person, and every person is a friend to him who gives gifts. All the brothers of a poor person hate him. How much more do his friends abandon him? So, benefit of wealth, you got friends. Wealth brings friends. One of the lessons I kind of wanted to squeeze into here, because there's so many lessons in Proverbs, I wanted to put some together about friendships and the bonds we form with other people, and that would have been a very viable lesson. Just don't have time to squeeze it all into this little quarter here that we're teaching. And the qualities and characteristics of a good friend. But what kind of friend do you think wealth brings? We've all heard what the fair-weathered friend, right? Again, a false sense of security. And you see, I've made this point, the negativity spoken regarding poverty comes from the way of the sluggard. But again, Solomon kind of presents this as a sad but true statement. Just kind of one of those things of human nature. But he makes himself clear, and I don't have this one up there, but if you see 14:20, the poor is hated even by his neighbor, but those who love the rich are many. But he follows it right up. If you got your Bibles, you can go to verse 21 of chapter 14, the very next verse. One who despises his neighbor sins, but one who is gracious to the poor is blessed. So human nature, typically people shun the poor. Okay, but Solomon is telling us if we're going down that path towards wisdom and let's say learning to be wise, we talked about the first step is the fear of the Lord. Then what we're going to do, he follows up in 21 there. We're going to be gracious to the poor. Those that are gracious to the poor are blessed. And then Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. So I wish I could do little quotes of benefits of being wealthy. I mean, one of those simple facts of life. Wealth has a little bit of power. Okay, those that are wealthy are going to have an easier time having power than those that are in poverty. But then the other point that I think I like out of this is where it talks about the borrower becoming the lender's slave. And there you can bring some kind of little bit of practicality to it, is dealing with debt. And Romans 13:8, you can see a kind of a New Testament follow-up on that. It says, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for the one who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. And I'll come back to that idea here in just a minute. And then one more, quote, benefit of wealth we find in Proverbs 18:23. A poor person utters pleadings, but a rich person answers defiantly. And this one I think is kind of weak, struggle with a little bit. But if you think about it, do you ever see a rich person out begging? Not necessarily. I hear all these stories like, I saw this guy on the corner of Oak in California begging, and then when he got in a brand new BMW. Yeah. Maybe. Um, so maybe he is rich, and that's how he's supplementing his income. Um, but if we look at that concept of pleading and a poor person's pleading, it actually has a good effect on the spirit. The Beatitudes talks about the poor in spirit. You see that idea of humility or humbleness and humility. And after all, we're all poor when it comes to God's favor on us and the salvation that God has given us. None of us deserve that. We need to kind of plead to that through living the proper Christian life. So, there is some benefits to being poor. And so, poor not by the way of the sluggard. But those that are more in poverty have the idea of being grateful for what they have, thankful for what they have, and there's some humility and humbleness in there. Any questions or comments on those? Does that make sense in the idea, and I think Solomon does a good idea too, of saying, hey, yeah, wealth seems to be all this, and there's no denying it's the way of the world is that wealth will benefit you while you're here on this earth temporarily. However, almost every benefit that you think you have of wealth is kind of a false sense of security. Janine?
And I think all of these are showing the attitude of those with wealth, because I know a member of the church who, when he retired, he paid off two church congregations owned. Another one was a dentist. He paid for every child in the congregation. He was their pediatric dentist. And I know another fellow who was a builder who gave young married people enough money to buy their homes. He was a big giver. We were all strong Christians.
And there's
your attitude, what you have.
exactly, and we'll get into that a little bit. And so, what do you do with your money? Well, like Janine said, those are great things to do with the money. Giving to the church, paying off any church debt, the dentist that paid for kids' dental work. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. That's definitely a degree of selflessness, right? Any other comments on that idea? Jackie?
It's interesting because kind of like what Jake's saying is there's a balance to it, right? The responsibility we learn from Proverbs about being responsible with your money, being smart about it, and then also like Jesus saying that it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God.
Right, and it is. That's.
Or is it easier? I'm sorry.
No, I know what you're talking about. It's right here. I'm gonna. But it's right. You can kind of see the idea of, well, if you want to use your wealth towards the work of God and to use it properly and do these kinds of kind things and giving things like Janine was just talking about, you're going to need a little bit of wisdom, okay? You're going to need a little bit of wisdom. So we're going to see where wisdom and wealth kind of work together. Moving on to number 4, what things are better than wealth? And this is where Solomon comes in and says, hey, wealth it's good, but it's kind of down here. There's a scripture in the New Testament that talks and refers to money as very little. Money's very little. It's a little thing that should be down here. You have God, family, and your priorities and whatnot. Money's down here. Wealth is down here. And then Solomon goes and shows all those things that should be way above wealth. And in Proverbs 19:22, it says, what is desirable in a person is his kindness. And it is better to be a poor person than a liar. So we can see here kindness. Okay, what's better than wealth? To be a kind person, to be an honest person. And then here you kind of see the idea that, well, there is some differentiation. There we go. That was a big word for me. I don't know why. In a poor person that becomes into poverty because of his sluggard attitude, and then that great poor person that is just poor and destitute because of life's hard struggles and whatnot, and under no accord of their own. Because you can see that person that's poor, they're better than a person that's dishonest. So you kind of start to see on some of these here where Solomon isn't bombasting all poor people. And I want to make that point clear enough, hopefully. 22:1, it says, a good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver or gold. So our reputation, how do people know me? What do people think of me as a person? That's better than the idea of wealth. So a good reputation. Better is little with righteousness than great income. Another would that would imply that same thing of a reputation. And then 19:1. Oh, what did I do? Good name. 19:1. Okay. Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than a person who is perverse in speech and is a fool. Better is a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. And that was 16:8. So Solomon tells us that having a godly character is worth much more than wealth. It's better to be righteous than to be rich. And then the last one on this little part here, Proverbs 8:10 through 11. And then 16:16. 8:10 through 11 says, accept my instruction and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all the desirable things cannot compare with her. 16:16, how much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen above silver. So there's that number one thing that should be in our list, right? Wisdom starts with the fear of God, and that is way more of a priority than silver or gold or receiving any type of wealth. Question number 5. And I have to come to 1 Timothy 6:10 because it's hard not to have a lesson in here about money, where it talks about for the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Is money evil? No, money is not evil. Okay? The love of money, that's going to lead you down the path towards evil. So people can have money and not love it. Get that point across. Money in and of itself is not evil. How we view our money, our attitude towards money, like Janine was saying, that can lead us down the wrong path and perhaps the path of sin. Where do we prioritize that? Remember, it's of little. It's way down here. Solomon just told us a bunch of things that are above it, and we know what is above all, the fear of the Lord. So what should we do with our money? I'm going to turbo through these. Honor the Lord from your wealth, and from the first of all your produce, and your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats overflow with new wine. The Old Testament, God carefully prescribed the idea of tithes, and we saw the idea of sacrifices and giving the first fruits. So one of the things that Solomon tells us to do with our money is we need to give back a portion to God. And then 3:27 through 28, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back tomorrow and I will give it to you when you have it with you. So kind of reiterating a point I made earlier, as Christians and as a way of wisdom, we need to pay our debts without delay, okay? Whether it be, I just did my taxes today. And I'm sorry, I kind of like doing taxes because I have kids and I generally get money back. So it's not like that dread is like, oh, I owe taxes, okay? It's my day's coming. I did it all, and I told Barbara, I was like, gosh, Abby's 16. Oh, no, we only get that child tax credit 2 more years on Abby, then we're going to start owing. But we know we all dread tax, right? That's all kids are in. It's just tax write-off, right? We all hate taxes. We all hate paying for things. But the wise need to pay the government. They need to pay for services rendered. And I think we need to be careful. We'll talk about it here in a minute. We need to be careful not to get ourselves so indebted to people that we owe money, whether it be Chase Manhattan or Discover or whatever. And then this one's kind of a cheat, but 1 Timothy 5:8, not technically Proverbs, but it is indicated in Proverbs. But if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And then think back to that godly woman we talked about in chapter 31 a couple weeks ago. And she provided for the needs of her household. So money needs to go towards providing the needs of our household. And right now, I'm sure you can all relate. Sure you all enjoyed paying your gas bill. That can kind of go back to the last statement I made about paying your bills. But we know a lot of money goes towards paying for the household. Food, shelter, clothing, those basics. 11, 24, 26, and then 19, 17, and 22, 9. Those all kind of refer to the needy and the call for to help provide the needs of the poor. And again, not necessarily the sluggard, but we need to minister to the needs of the poor. And then back to the first verse, I started it out here, 6:6, go to the ant, you lazy one. But then look at verse 8, it says, prepare its foods for the summers and gathers provisions in the harvest. And then 21:20, there's precious treasure and oil in the home of the wise, but a foolish person swallows it up. So I think Solomon makes it very clear with our money. We need to make provisions for the future. We need to have a backup plan. We need to have a little bit of savings if we can. And we need to make wise provisions for the days ahead. And then back to that wise woman of chapter 31 that we talked about, where she bought the field. From her talents, she planted a vineyard. She was out there making investments. And then you got Matthew 25. You're all familiar with the parable of the talents. The guy that had one talent didn't do anything, but then the man that gave the talent says, man, why don't you at least put the money in the bank? Okay, so I think the Bible shows that, we can also make wise investments. Distinguish between savings and money that you have for investments, and consider the risk involved. And then 13:22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. So Solomon also says it would be wise to make a provision for an inheritance. Now, that's the literal sense, something for our children. Okay, then you can't help but think of the metaphorical sense of the inheritance that God has given us, the inheritance that God has given his children. But it's far better for us to leave a heritage of godliness and wisdom to our children than a large amount of money. But nevertheless, Solomon in Proverbs does say that, hey, an inheritance is a good thing if you can leave that for your family. So in conclusion, like Jackie talked about Mark 10:25, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. So it's not easy. And that's pretty difficult, a camel through the eye of a needle. So I think we can see here then there's no greater need for wisdom than when we're dealing with wealth. And here in today's society, here in the United States of America particularly, we have become so engrossed with wealth and that push and desire to get more money that it's easy to get caught up in the way of the fool when we're dealing with that longing for money. There really should not be a longing for money in us. In Proverbs chapter 30, we talked about those last two chapters. King Lemuel wrote chapter 31 that we talked about where the wise woman was. And then there, Agur, A-G-U-R, I'm going to say Agur, in chapter 30, verse 7 through 9, he has a good outlook that I want to close this out with here on this. It says, 2 things I have asked of you. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, so that I will not be full and deny you and say, who was the Lord? And I will not become impoverished and steal and profane the name of the Lord. So Agur realized that both poverty, he says, don't let me get so poor that I have to steal, but yet let me not get so rich that I find that I am denying your name. So he realized that both poverty and prosperity had their dangers. So So the earnest petition which Augur made here was that he be righteous and not rich. So we know that the greatest treasure in life is wisdom. And as I keep saying, it begins with the fear of the Lord. So we are encouraged. You will find, I don't think you're going to find anywhere in here where it's going to show you the idea of pursuing wealth as it does pursuing wisdom. So we can see all through Proverbs we are encouraged to search for wisdom, not wealth. But wealth is kind of a byproduct of wisdom. So if wealth is to come, it should come as a fringe benefit and not in of a goal of itself. There, I got everything in I wanted to get in tonight. So now, you guys got questions or comments? I know I threw it all out there kind of fast, and I'm trying to get as much covered as I can as we dwindled this lesson down. Any comment? Yeah, Ian.
I think it's interesting to, as you said, Proverbs doesn't emphasize riches as the end product, right? It kind of goes back and forth with this idea of righteousness. Couple that with how did Christ treat riches? He didn't come necessarily denouncing rich people, and I don't mean this as a denouncement either. What did he tell the rich young ruler? He's like, congratulations, you have a lot of money. No, he said, oh, great, you've done the righteous things, right? You kept all these commandments, except for one. Go and sell all your possessions to the poor. And that was difficult for that person. Whether he did or not is up to debate, but it was difficult. And then in the same way, he said, there's none greater born among women except John the Baptist, who he clearly described as a poor person who
Right.
wandered around with nothing.
Right.
So, again, it has to come back to this idea of righteousness. And like you said, riches might be a byproduct of that. We're in that position. They're certainly not the end goal.
Correct.
As he describes in various ways.
Yeah. Riches is a byproduct, not the end goal. Any other comments? I see the kids lining up out there like, how come the adults are still talking? Abby's looking at me. My dad just keeps on going. All right. Thanks all for listening. I appreciate it.